I've already introduced you, Elliot, but I haven't. I haven't, and I'm not actually prepared to do what I'm supposed to do. So let me get my notes here. But I guess I can do this. Elliot is a gift because he's one of the, yes, you are. He's one of these people who came up to me and said, you know, Shirley, someday I would like to talk on this topic. And I knew nothing about Elliot. And then I looked him up and realized he was a mathematician and has some impressive academic credentials. All I knew is he was a guy at Shomrei who wanted to talk about the atomic bomb and the Nazis. And with that, Elliot, I'm going to let you pick it up and tell us more, because the slides are great. So
okay, thanks, Shirley. So first, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I want to make sure I thank John for helping me present the slides. And I want to thank Shirley because not only did she think this was a good idea, but the original title, which is the subtitle here, was about Jewish scientists who contributed to building the atomic bomb. But I thought that's not catchy enough. So I said to Shirley, let's call it How the Nazis Didn't Build the Atomic Bomb. And she thought about it and said, even better, How the Nazis Built the Atomic Bomb for the United States, which is kind of true. And so there are lots of ways to spin the story of how the atomic bomb was developed. So this is one with, you know, a very Jewish slant. So that's what you're going to see. All right, next slide, please.
John's got that, right?
Yeah. All right. So by the way, there's only 2 slides with any science at all in this whole talk, and this is one of them. Okay, and that's about as deep into the science as it gets. So in 1913, this fellow Niels Bohr, who was Danish and won the Nobel Prize in 1922 for this, he put forth the theory of an atom as as a nucleus that's composed of protons and the neutrons and the electrons orbit around it. And maybe you remember that from high school, okay? But if so, the helium atom shown here, it's got 2 protons, 2 neutrons, and 2 electrons orbiting around it. So this kind of ushered in the atomic age. And if you go to the next slide, all right, John, next slide, please.
Is that me? Yeah.
All right, I'm going to wait for that. There we go. All right, so this started a lot of
research. You joined twice and it's echoing because
that's what happened. Yeah.
Okay.
So you're going to have to turn your mic off.
Someone has 2 devices close.
All right. Should I wait?
Keep going.
Okay. So this it started a lot of research into what the nucleus was composed of and what keeps it together. So the main guy in that research was this Italian fellow, Enrico Fermi. You might be familiar with that name. He won the Nobel Prize in 1938. He became the main figure in the research. In 1930, these 2 Dutch Jews, Uhlenbeck and Goudsmit, they take positions at Ann Arbor in the United States. They see what's starting to happen in Europe. Okay, there's already, you know, the Nazis are starting to get power, and they don't like what they're seeing, and they get out early. And they start a summer school for theoretical physics, and scientists came, you know, from basically all over Europe to participate. And this kind of laid the groundwork for the later scientists to come to the US when the Nazis took power. And the emphasis on the summer schools was on studying what we said, the atomic a nucleus and what kept it together. And Fermi, who was, the preeminent expert in this field, he came and lectured there often. So in 1933, Hitler became the chancellor, and he starts to restrict the Jews, and eventually the Jews were forbidden from having jobs in the government or universities, and the exodus started. All right, next slide. So right before that, 1932, Einstein, he had won the Nobel Prize in 1921. He renounced his German citizenship and he came to the US. In fact, he went to Princeton. Now, he's a pacifist, so he doesn't want to get involved in any of this stuff. He just wants to, continue to do his research. But what's significant was in 1932, Einstein was almost a household name. When the tests were done after World War II that confirmed his theory of relativity, it was on the front pages of every newspaper all around the world, and people knew who he was. So it was a really big deal. Now, in 1933, right after that, this fellow, James Franck, who had won the Nobel Prize in 1925, he wasn't Jewish, but he resisted what the Germans were trying to do to the Jews. So he left Germany and he went first to Denmark in 33 and then to Johns Hopkins in 35. And Max Born, who also was not Jewish, but he eventually won the Nobel in 1954. He went to Britain. And these two guys, now you have to, think about this. Here's two top guys who left Europe. One's in London, one's here, and they're sympathizers with the Jews. So, this really starts to gain some momentum. Now, while this is going on, right, the Germans are coming up with this concept of what I call German physics. And this really happened. They believe that if the science was not developed by an honest to God Aryan German, they were going to ignore it and it couldn't be right. Seriously. Okay. So that's going on. Now, in the late 1930s, these people, all right, John von Neumann came to Princeton. Absolutely brilliant guy. He developed the first computers. He was a genius in math, and he developed something called game theory. Eugene Wigner, who won the Nobel in '63, came to Princeton, and this fellow Victor Weisskopf, who Bohr helped get to the University of Rochester, and he became the group leader of the theoretical division for the bomb, right? So these guys were all Jewish. They wanted to get out, and they did. Okay, next slide. Now, 1938, okay, Mussolini bars the Jews from the universities in his country. Now, here's where it gets very intriguing. So remember, I talked about Fermi, who had won the Nobel in 38. He was a super genius, equally good at theory and experimentation, which is really rare. Here's the thing. He had married a Jewish woman, and at the time, he didn't think that the fascists would be like the Nazis. So he sees what's going on, and he realizes he's got to take his wife and leave the country and come here. So here's how he did it, because he knew he couldn't just leave, like they wouldn't let him. So he had accepted, he was teaching in Palermo, and he had accepted a position in Rome, and the plan was he was going to go to Stockholm, accept his his Nobel Prize, and then go to Rome. So he had all the stuff from his house shipped to Rome. He accepts his Nobel Prize and jumps on a boat to New York. And that's how he got out. Yeah. And one of his students, Emilio Segre, who won the Nobel in '59, he goes to UC Berkeley. And in '39, this fellow, Stan Ulam, he's Polish. He comes to the United States, and he had worked with von Neumann. And I'll show you later what all these people did during the bomb, during that. And in '43, now remember Niels Bohr, right? The guy who started all this, okay? Turned out his mother was Jewish, but he figured that Denmark wouldn't be affected, okay? And then in '43, the Nazis, they invaded Denmark, and now, there's some issues there. Well, the Allies find out that the Nazis are going to come and arrest Bohr. So the story goes, they send some troops to Bohr's house. As they're leaving through the back door, the Nazis are coming in the front door. The soldiers, they cover fire for Bohr to get out of there. He gets on a boat to Sweden, where a bomber airplane is waiting for him. They hide him in the bomb bay of the bomber airplane, and he flies from Denmark to Britain. On that flight, he became unconscious because way up there it's really cold and the oxygen is not as good. But he recovered, and then he came here, and that's probably the most dramatic way that these scientists came here. But you can see what's going on, right? There's this big, I would say a big community, right, of Jewish scientists who know all these things, and they're super brilliant, and they're all coming here. Now, in addition to this, there was a guy, Rabi, who won the Nobel in 1944. He was raised on the Lower East Side, and he was at Columbia, and he helped scientists go to Columbia or other places in the States. Okay, next slide. Here's some more. Edward Teller came to the U.S. in the 1930s. So his family had been killed by the Nazis, and he was one of the people who was very, very concerned that the Germans would develop their own bomb. And his fellow Hungarian, Szilard, it's pronounced, he also came to Columbia in the 1930s. The key thing here is Szilard had conceived of what we're going to call the nuclear chain reaction, which is basically the idea that allows you to build an atomic bomb. He had thought of it and patented it in 1933. So they come over, and they're both at Columbia. And like I said, all these people who I mentioned, they all had very big roles in building the bomb. So in 1938, now remember, the war hasn't, I'll put it this way, World War II had not officially started yet. That comes like 1 year later. And remember, the United States didn't get involved officially until Pearl Harbor, but we were helping out Britain, and we were helping out the Poles and all this. So in 1938, a group of these people who had come from Europe, including Szilard, Teller, and Wigner, they're very concerned that the Germans could build an atomic weapon. So they wanted to get Roosevelt's attention and tell him we need to start a bomb effort. So Szilard figured best way to do that, get Einstein to sign the letter and send it to the president because Einstein had the most clout, right? But Einstein was the pacifist, right? And again, he's still, like the most well-known scientist in the world. At first, he didn't want to do it because, again, he's a pacifist. He didn't want to get involved. But Teller and Szilard talk him into doing it, and the letter went to Roosevelt. Okay, next slide. So less than a year later, the president authorized what became known as the Manhattan Project to build an atomic bomb. This was like a top secret thing. They put in charge this guy, General Leslie Groves, who had overseen the construction of the Pentagon. So he was a person who could take a really super large scale project and get it done. And that's why he was put in charge. And so at its peak, and this is something to really think about, the Manhattan Project employed 130,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah. It cost $2 billion in 1939, which would be $23 billion in 2018 money. And it was really, I would say, the first the first big science thing that was done in this country. It was back then the equivalent of putting a man on the moon in 1969. So at this point, all the stuff about building a bomb was pretty much theoretical. Okay, so there was some experimental stuff that said, well, you could do something and then some, and maybe it'll lead to a bomb, but there was enough fear that the Germans could do it that we went ahead with it. So basically there were three main efforts. There was in Oak Ridge in Tennessee, what I called a uranium enrichment for the first two bombs. So basically, the issue there was there's a type of uranium that we'll call uranium-235, and there's a type called uranium-238. The one used in the bomb is uranium-235, but it's very rare. And so it's mixed in with the U-238. And how do you separate it out? And that was a key, huge problem. And there were two or three ways originally that they thought it might be done. And for a while, they tried all three. But as time went on, they couldn't afford in either time or money to try out all three, so they picked one or two and they kept going with that, and one worked. And I don't want, you shouldn't get the impression that this was like an easy thing to do, right? To build the bomb. I mean, at every step there were decisions and experiments and trial and error. And this was all made behind this backdrop of incredible time pressure because we got to get it before the Nazis do. Okay, so all this is going on. So there's two of them. And then in Hanford, Washington, the scientists had figured out you can also use plutonium to make a bomb. So they went, good, let's try and build that also. So in the Hanford plant, the the first real nuclear reactors were actually built out there to make plutonium. So all this is going on all at the same time. Okay, next slide. So there were also some Jews from America working on it. This guy Feynman from Far Rockaway, he won the Nobel in '65. I had the pleasure of attending his lectures when I was in grad school, and this guy was a riot. He retained his Far Rockaway accent. So he'd be talking about quantum chromodynamics like this, brilliant guy with a keen sense of humor. So when he was at Los Alamos, so the facility was, closely guarded and surrounded by, a fence and all this. And when you went into work in the morning, right, you showed your badge to a guard. Feynman found a hole in the fence. So he said hi to the guard, went around, went through the hole, came back around, said hi to the guard again. And that's how they discovered, oh, there's a hole in the fence that we better plug up. There's all sorts of stories about him, but he made some very key contributions. Then there was this fellow, J. Robert Oppenheimer. So he was put in charge of the whole thing. And this was kind of controversial because he had ties to the Communist Party, but it was really thought, he's not a threat and he's the best guy for the job. Now, remember, Teller had come over from Hungary. Teller had a lot of issues with Oppenheimer and putting Oppenheimer in charge. And in fact, after the war, during the McCarthy hearings, Teller actually testified against Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer lost his security clearance for a while. So there were all these things, right, that are going on while they're trying to get the bomb built. There was this guy, Frankel. Now, here's a big deal. He determined that the fission chain reaction, which I'm about to show you, could lead to a large explosion. And this guy, Perlman, he figured out how to separate plutonium from uranium, which led to the third of the 3 bombs that were built. All key contributions. All right, next slide. All right, let's go over some chronology just so we have this. 30s and 40s, right? The Jewish scientists are escaping. They come to the United States and Britain. 1933, Hitler comes to power. And in 38, Hitler, Germany takes over Austria. Then the Einstein letter comes, and in 1938, the Czech Republic ceded some very important land to the Germans. 1939, think about this. Bohr demonstrated fission as a key, and that's the key part of building the bomb, He's still in Europe, okay? And in September 1939, World War II actually officially starts when Hitler invades Poland. Right after that, FDR gives the okay for the Manhattan Project. And then 2 years into the project, the first controlled nuclear reaction is attained in a squash court underneath the football field in Chicago.
Wow.
Next slide. Yeah, now here's what it's all about. Okay, if you start where it says this one neutron starts the chain reaction. Okay, so you throw this one neutron at one atom of uranium-235. That uranium-235 decays into krypton, barium, and 3 more neutrons. The key is when it releases those 3 neutrons and splits up into barium and krypton, it releases a lot of energy. So now you have three more neutrons. And if you can get each one of those to split another U-235 atom, now you're getting more. And that's the chain reaction. Okay, so the issue was uranium-235 is only 0.72% of all the uranium in the world. Number one, how do you separate it out? Number two, how do you get enough to make a bomb? And how much do you need to make a bomb, right? All these things are unknown, okay? But it's been shown that you can get this important chain reaction, okay? So now things are going. After this, next slide. So now in the Manhattan Project, now they're really thinking, hey, you know, this could really be done. And now the attention shifts a lot to the Los Alamos facility in New Mexico, where they're busy trying to figure out how to use that chain reaction to build the bomb. Because see, to build a bomb, you have to figure out, right, when you want to start the explosion, how do you start the neutrons to go into the uranium-235, and how do you design this whole thing so that you get enough of the chain reaction to make a big explosion? And that's really what they were doing at Los Alamos. In 1943, Japan became the primary target for the bomb because it was clear that the Germans were not going to win the war. And in 1945, right, the European war ends. In July 1945, now mind you, this is 6 years after the program had begun, what was called the Trinity test, right, at Los Alamos was done. Now here was the thing, and again, this is, you know, all about like the drama and all the decisions. They had enough uranium-235 for 2 bombs and enough plutonium for 1. They originally considered bringing the Japanese to the test and showing them the power of the bomb so they wouldn't have to really use it. The issue was, what if that test failed? And they didn't want to take that risk. So they decided, you know, we'll do the test and then we'll figure out what to do. So the test worked. The Japanese were informed that, you know, we just did this. We don't want to use it against you, and you should surrender. But the Japanese didn't want to. So the first bomb, unfortunately, was, hold on. Yeah, here we go. The first bomb was dropped in August 1945 on Hiroshima. So that was the second of the uranium-235 bombs. And then but the Japanese still didn't surrender. So the decision was made, drop the second bomb on Nagasaki, unfortunately, and that was the plutonium bomb. And that ended the war. Okay, next slide. So here's some quick specific contributions. These people, Feynman calculated the yield of the fission bomb, which was basically how big the explosion would be. Perlman figured out how to separate plutonium from uranium. Teller had a key role in designing the bomb, and von Neumann designed all sorts of stuff, and he was a computing and calculating genius. And remember the time frame. No computers were around then, and yet they were able to do all the theoretical calculations that they needed somehow to get this thing done. Wow. And von Neumann was a key in that. Segre, he discovered plutonium. That guy, James Franck, who had come over in 1925, he became the director of the chemistry division of the Manhattan Project. And remember Goudsmit, who had come over, you know, early in like 1930, and he was Dutch. He was the head of the team that assessed the progress of the Nazi bomb effort. So he was a key guy because they were always asking him, all right, so are we behind? Are we ahead? You know, all this stuff. Victor Weisskopf was the associate head of the theoretical division at Los Alamos. Ulam, who had come from Poland, he had worked with von Neumann, and he was responsible for developing a lot of the computational techniques that were critical to the bomb design. And Wigner led the Hanford effort to build the reactors that produced the plutonium. Those were the first like real nuclear reactors that actually worked. So these were all things that went into building this. All right, next slide. Now, meanwhile, what about the German bomb effort, right? Because that was the thing that was, you know, impelling all this work to get done fast. So during the entire Manhattan Project, it was believed that the Germans were also working on an atomic weapon. Like I said, it gave a great sense of urgency to the effort. Now, Werner Heisenberg, and you might know that name from the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. He was German. He wasn't Jewish. He had won the Nobel in 1932. He was probably the most brilliant of all these Nobel Prize winners in Germany who was not Jewish. And he didn't leave. He didn't want to leave. He said, nope, Germany is my country and I'm going to support them. Okay. So he chose to stay, and he was put in charge of the German bomb effort. Now, there's a lot of speculation about what happened here. He was a theorist. He didn't really know how to build things. But there's a lot of speculation that he wanted to be put in charge of the Nazi bomb effort so that he could make sure that it didn't get built. Okay, seriously. And so there's speculation that he dragged his feet and that he may have made a miscalculation on purpose that temporarily showed, you know, this isn't going to work. Okay, next slide. So the effort that the Nazis had, including using something that is called the heavy water. So heavy water is, you know, H2O, right? But the hydrogen atoms have a neutron in them also, which regular hydrogen does not, and that's why it's called the heavy water. So a fertilizer plant protected by mountains in Norway was converted to do this in 1939, and this was probably why the Nazis invaded Norway to start with, because this plant was built like way into the mountains, so that a bombing attempt was tried to disable it, and it failed. Okay, and the plan for the Nazis was they were going to build a nuclear reactor and then figure out how to convert that to a bomb. And the reason that the heavy water is important is because if you remember the slide about the chain reaction, the heavy water would slow down the neutrons as they were made, and it would increase the probability that they will hit a uranium-235 atom. So that was the German design. So the heavy water was very important. So in 1943, first the Brits tried to bomb this facility. They couldn't do it. And the Brits sent in some commandos. They failed. So the Norwegians said, you know, we know how to do this, and it's in Norway. We're going to go in and do it. And they sent in like 8 people. They started off like 15 to 20 miles from the plant in the mountains, in the snow. 4 guys went down. They saw what was going on with the plant. They figured out like where and when to set the bombs. And the other 4 guys came down. They invaded the plant, they set the bombs, and they got out, and it worked. And it set back the Nazis for at least 6 months, and that was important, you know. And the Nazis figured out how to recover from that, and they eventually had enough of the heavy water. They wanted to send it back to Germany to be used in the bomb effort, and you know, so the Norwegians said no way. They figured out how to blow up the ferry that was transporting this across a lake from the mountains where the plant was to the rail station. So they did that, and that kind of ended the German bomb effort. So the Nazis may have realized that they didn't have the resources to build the bomb, because remember, there was like 130,000 people, but they were still working on it. Now, okay, no talk about Jews in World War II would be complete without talking about this guy, Mo Berg.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so some of you probably know about him, right? There's books, there are movies. There was this great movie that was just shown with the Jewish Film Festival at the JCC. But Mo Berg's story goes like this: a Major League Baseball catcher, brilliant guy, spoke at least 7 languages, went to Yale Law School and got his degree. Brilliant guy with a photographic memory. He offered to become a spy during World War II. How does this relate to the German bomb effort? Well, in 1943, okay, Heisenberg, who's the head of the German bomb effort, he's giving a talk in Zurich, in Switzerland. And the Americans say to Mo Berg, "You're going to go there as a physics student." Now, it turned out the professor who headed up that department, right, at Zurich was anti-Nazi, and he couldn't profess that outright because Switzerland was staying out of this. But he was approached and said, "Would you sponsor Mo Berg, our spy, as a student to attend this lecture?" So Mo Berg goes, and Mo Berg knows nothing about science. I mean, and he's told, you sit there, you listen. If Heisenberg says one of these 3 things, you get up and shoot him, and then take your cyanide pill. And Mo Berg was prepared to do this. And he sits in on the lecture, and he doesn't hear the 3 things. So what he did to make sure was he waited for Heisenberg to leave the lecture and go back to his hotel. And of course, Mo Berg spoke German really well. And he engaged Heisenberg in conversation all the way back to his hotel, waiting to hear one of those 3 things. And if he had heard one, he would have offed Heisenberg right there, but he didn't. And Heisenberg's talk, it turned out, was not about the bomb at all. So that's how Mo Berg played into this. And that's like another piece of the whole drama that went into this whole thing. All right, next slide. We're at the end. So I think it's clear, when I tell you all this, the atomic bomb couldn't have been built without all of these scientists who were really forced to leave Europe and come here. And that's how the Nazis built the bomb for the United States. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have some time for some, I see virtual applause.
Thanks. Thank you.
So, so there was one comment, which was that one of Shomrei's long time members, David Aronson, who has passed on, was
He's
a
been
member of
involved.
the. Did you know him?
I came across his name with the Mo Berg stuff, I think. He either wrote a book or was involved in producing one of the films about him.
That may be. David was a brilliant man, scientist. Yeah. Are there questions? That was wonderful.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
So I'm looking at the questions.
Carolyn Lack had a question.
Carolyn.
Oh, not a question, just a comment.
Yes.
That I am related to J. Robert Oppenheimer.
Really?
He was a second cousin of my father. Needless to say, I never met him. I don't think my father ever met him. But I do remember when I told my oldest granddaughter, you know, you are related to Oppenheimer. She was horrified. She thought that's awful.
Oh, yeah.
So I had to try and explain to her that there were some very valuable things that came out of this whole thing with atomic energy. And it wasn't all.
No, it wasn't. And, you know, Oppenheimer himself, he had a lot of problems with actually dropping the bomb. And when the first one was dropped, he had a lot of psychological problems about it, and he never forgave himself. You know, like he took it upon himself about it. But you know, the country owes him a lot. I'm going to say it like that, you know, because he was the guy. Now, I'll say this: all these the brilliant scientists, you know. There's a lot of strong personalities on that team. I'll say it like that, okay? And Robert, he was the one who got them all to work together, and that was no mean feat. So
Elliot, I have a couple of questions popping up, so I'm gonna put forward. Just an observation. I'm gonna go from the bottom up. Charles Steindl was saying that the experiments that discovered fission were the work of a Jewish woman scientist, Lisa Meitner.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole lot. Yeah.
It's another story.
Lisa Meitner was, she was in Europe. She was critical in the fission experiments also. Yeah.
So, and I see Andy and Manny Schrager saying, where were all the 130,000 people working on the bomb? Were they spread out in the various?
Yeah, they were spread out amongst those three places. So some were in Oak Ridge, some were in Los Alamos, some were in Hanford. I think the biggest plant was the Tennessee one because they were trying more than one way to do the uranium separation, and the way that they did it, they needed a lot of land.
So that brings us to Sharon's question, which was, how did these locations get picked?
Okay, well, the easiest one is the Los Alamos one. That was, I think, some boys' school that wasn't being used. And for that in particular, for that effort, they wanted a place that was in the middle of nowhere so that they could keep it secret.
Right.
So that's a Los Alamos. Oak Ridge, I think there was already some kind of a government thing there, and they saw that they could buy up the rest of the land that they needed. And the Hanford one, I'm really not sure of, but I know, again, part of it was by land.
Got it. So why Manhattan Project? Because they were all from Columbia? I mean,
No, I don't know why they did that. I haven't got, I didn't check that out. I mean, that might have been it, but. You know.
And one more personal question. Did Bohr's wife get out as well?
I don't think so.
Really?
I haven't read about that at all. Like they just got Bohr out, and that's all that I've read. So I'll say I really don't know. Not I don't think so. Right?
Okay.
I don't know.
Oh, well, Manny, Andrew, you're going to have to Google that one. I think one more question here, David. Ask your own question.
Is it true that Oppenheimer refused to work on the hydrogen bomb project with Teller?
You know, I'm not sure, but that sounds correct. Yeah, I mean, after they dropped those bombs, he just had it with all this. You know, his famous quote was, "I have blood on my hands."
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a great play.
Yeah.
The play of Oppenheimer is a great play.
Yeah, and depending, now there were a couple of people who worked on it, like Szilard, who was like a key guy in the whole thing. He was against dropping it on civilians. Okay, but the powers that were at the time, they decided, we, for whatever reason, and I'm not condoning it either, but that was the tack that they took.
Yep. So I have time for one more question, and then I'll tell you about the rest of our schedule. Any last questions? Well, I can speak for the crowd. This was quite wonderful and a whole new view. Go ahead. Speak. Josie has now edited. Josie has edited your slide. She says that the ending paragraph should say, because Jewish scientists fled Nazi Germany for safety in the U.S., Nazis made it possible for Bob.
Yeah.
Not just
So
some.
technically, absolutely.
All right.
Hi, Elliot.
Hi, Josie.
Yes.
Good talk.
Well, I can't argue with that.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate
you.
it. coming.
That's great.
Thank you.
Last pitch. We have 2 more Tuesdays this July for our At Nourish. Next week, we go a little lighter. We're going to the theater. 2 people, Michael and Lindsay Sag, are both directors of New York City theaters, and they're going to talk about the world of theater right now during COVID and the challenges they're facing. So that's next Tuesday. And then our last one, I wanted to end on a beautiful note, and I can see Carolyn there. Carolyn Lack and her daughter, Judy Myers, will be talking about their gardens. And I hope we'll have pictures. And so next week, the SAG on the theater, followed by Carolyn and Judy on beauty in the garden. So thank you all for coming. Elliot, this was great. I never thought it would be, as much fun. And so, as always, it's a surprise, and we thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, all.
Okay, bye.
And just click